Good morning, good evening, good afternoon to wherever you are in the world. A very warm welcome to Leadership Insights with me, Prashant. आप सबको मेरा प्यार भरा नमस्कार. As always, I would like to start this show by saying thank you to each and every one of you for the love and support that you're giving me and this show. This show is nothing without you. So thank you for your support. Now, taking our journey forward, the promise of bringing in different aspects of leadership, bringing in different perspectives of leadership, because we are on a mission to understand those little things about leadership that matter the most. We have another amazing guest with us today. Now, today's guest lives with this motto that today's leaders have the responsibility to inspire the leaders of tomorrow. This is what he has lived his life by. He is someone who has more than 40 years of leadership experience. And in that, he has more than 23 years of experience of working with the US Army. He has recently published his book that's called Your Leadership Legacy, and it was something that was published this year. And I have read it. This is the book, and I can tell you from my experience, I'm someone who reads a lot. You can see a lot of books here. I'm someone who reads a lot, and let me tell you, being a leadership enthusiast, I can tell you this is something that you should read if you're interested in leadership. So, this is the book that you should read. Now, since I'm talking about this book and I'm so interested in this book and the lessons that it has brought forward, it's important for us to deep dive and understand few lessons in this book, and that's a decision that I've taken. I spoke to him and I told him that I have a request that in this conversation, can we actually focus on your book, because there are some things that I've marked and highlighted, and I want to focus on those things and understand more from you, because you are someone who's experienced it, you're someone who's written it. So what is behind that? How can we go deeper into those lessons so that we can actually inculcate that in our life? And he has gracefully agreed that, yes, let's focus on that and bring those leadership lessons forward. So, ladies and gentlemen, without any further delay, let's welcome today's guest with us. We have Lieutenant Colonel Oakland McCulloch.
Well,
Hi,
thanks,
Oak.
Prashant.
Very good morning.
Thanks. I'm excited to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you, Oak. And thank you so much for being here with us today. So, as I was talking to everyone about your book, and let me tell you, the thoughts that run into my mind when I think about your book is that it has very simple and precise leadership lessons, but a very holistic approach to them. Now, I have read certain books that talk about certain leadership lessons, but they are impactful, they're helpful, there is no doubt. But they're not holistic in nature, so they cannot be applied anywhere and everywhere in situations. Now, this book covers lessons which can be applied in various situations. It doesn't tell you just do this number one, wherever you are, whatever you're doing, just follow this. This book doesn't tell you that. It tells you different lessons that you can apply in different situations that you are in as a leader, because as leaders, there are a lot of times when we face situations that we haven't seen before or heard of before. So that's the best part that I liked about this book, Oak. So my first question to you is, what inspired you to write this book and why a book on leadership?
Yeah. So, going back to what you just said, there is no single formula for being a leader. And anybody who believes that isn't a leader. It never has been, because it just doesn't work that way. Everybody has their own little piece, and you got to figure out what works for you and your organization. So I wrote the book. What inspired me to write the book was when I was a professor of military science. Of course, I've been in the Army for 23 years. I've, had all kinds of leadership positions in the Army and outside the Army, both in, high school. I played baseball, basketball, American football. So I was captain of my team. I was president of my student body government in high school. I was in leadership positions at West Point and ROTC. So I've had leadership positions all along. But when I was a professor of military science running an Army ROTC program at the University of South Alabama, I went around and I talked to high school kids and college students. And I would always ask them, I say, so what do you want to be when you grow up, when you go to work? Because that's what you do when you grow up. You go to work. What do you want to be? And I'd always get this, Colonel McCulloch, I want to be a leader. And I said, okay, that's great. The world needs more leaders. I said, what does that mean? What does that look like? And I get that deer in the headlights look, I had no idea what that meant. They knew what they wanted, but they didn't know what it took to be one.
Yeah.
And they didn't know what it meant to be a leader. So I came up with a presentation, and I gave it to all these high schools and college students about what it takes to be a good leader and what it looks like. And I've been doing that since about 2006. And so my passion right now in life, and it really is to get out and talk to as many young men and women as I can talk to about leadership and help develop the leadership of the next generation in what I believe is the right way to lead. And so I knew if I wanted to do that, I knew I had to do two things. I knew I had to write a book to get my message out to more people. And I knew I had to get out on the speaking engagement. And I knew that if I didn't write a book, nobody was going to hire me to come speak. Because, Prashant, if you don't have a book, you're obviously not an expert, right? And I hate that word expert anyway. I mean, nobody's an expert at stuff. You're good at it. And so I think I'm pretty good at leadership. And I think the book lays it out that what you need to do to be a leader in simple terms. So I get that question a lot. Why did I write the book? But I also get, who did I write it for? And I really did write it for two different groups of people. I wrote it for young, aspiring young leaders who are either in high school or college who think they want to be a leader, or young people who are leaders right now, just starting out as a leader in a company or organization or in the Army or military or wherever, to kind of explain to them what it takes to be a leader and what being a leader looks like. And then I also wrote it for old people like me. And I've actually had people, who have had 20, 30, 40 years of leadership experience like I have, who have told me, Oak, I didn't learn a whole lot from your book. I learned a few techniques here or there, but I pretty much have done all the things that you're talking about to be successful. But what I did pick up was I was reading and I would look at something and I'd say, you know what? I used to do that really well, and I don't do that so well anymore. Maybe I need to dedicate some time to get back to doing that. And I think that's all of us. We're busy. We're doing all the things that it requires to do as a leader, and sometimes we forget the little things that have made us successful, or maybe we didn't forget them. We just don't do them as well as we used to.
True, Oak. And I remember in our last conversation that we had before the show, and I spoke about it in our introduction video also that I posted yesterday. You said this, that when you speak to leaders, they say that, Oak, we've been on this journey of leadership for many years, but your book has reminded us of those basics, those foundational things of leadership that we had forgotten. We were those people who used to do these things. We were the people who used to live by these things, but we seem to have somewhere lost it in this race that we are on of growing our organizations and teams and making things big. And this book is a reminder that have you forgotten the foundations? Because if you don't have those strong, then you can't build very high skyscrapers on that. They'll fall down because your foundation is not being cured, is not being taken care of.
That's right. And as I tell people all the time, and you and I had this conversation, again, I'm an athlete. I played sports all my life, and I can always remember my coaches when we'd start the season, they'd say, we got to get back to basics. In baseball, that was pitching and catching and hitting. And in football, that was hitting and running and tackling, and they would say, look, if we don't get the basics right, if you can't do the simple things, then how can you move on to do the more difficult things? And it's the same thing in leadership. It's the same thing in life, but certainly in leadership, you got to do the little things. Then you can move on to do the bigger and better things. And I think we forget that sometimes. We get involved in the day-to-day life, and we forget that we got to do the simple things right every day if we want to be good.
True. And based on what you said, Oak, another question that's coming to my mind is, you said that you've always been someone who has been a leader. You've been somebody who's always been in sports, in athletics, or been in debate teams, or you've been someone who's always been active and been in the forefront of everything since you were a kid. Now, there are a lot of people out there who probably have not been that way. The question probably running in their mind is that, oh, I cannot relate to what you're saying. I can understand what you're saying, but that's not me. That's not who I have been for first 15, 18, 20 years of my life. Does that mean it's not possible for me to be a leader? It's not possible for me to take the journey of becoming a leader?
Absolutely not. I do not believe that. I believe that some people are born with innate ability to lead. And we see that. You go out on a soccer field with 5 and 6 and 10-year-olds, and you see who the leader is. Nobody elected that young man or that young lady as the leader. They just stepped up and they became the leader. So I believe some people are born and or raised with that ability to do that. And that's great. Those people are fantastic people to lead. But I also believe that you can learn to be a leader. And I always use this example, and this is a true example. When I was running that ROTC program, of course, I was bringing young men and women in to be leaders in the Army. That was my job. Over 4 years, develop young men and women, bring them in as freshmen in college, and when they graduate 4 years from college and through the ROTC program, now they're an officer in the United States Army. So I brought in lots of young men and women over the years. Well, I just took over, and I had this young man who came to my program as a freshman, and he walks up the first day. And in the back of my mind, I'm saying, yeah, this young man's never going to make it. He's just not going to make it. And you know what? 4 years later, that young man was my battalion commander. He was the best cadet in my program. And he's a major in the United States Army today doing great things. So I don't believe that you can't learn how to be a leader. I believe you can. And I've seen it, and I've proven that you can develop those things to be a good leader. You got to want to do it. You got to be open to ideas and experiences. And as long as you do those two things, then you can learn how to be a leader. The other piece of that is, and I tell people this all the time, two other pieces to that. You got to want to do it. You got to be open to some ideas. Number 3 is you have to read. You have to be willing to read. Leaders are readers, okay? You show me a good leader, I'll show you somebody who's got a library. I mean, they have libraries if you're a good leader, and because you got to take in all that information and as much of it as you can. And the last thing I always tell people, if you want to be a good leader, if you want to develop your leadership skills, you must never turn down a chance to be the leader. When somebody walks up and says, "You want to be the leader?" you say, "Absolutely, I want to be the leader." Good leaders want to lead all the time. I want to be the leader all the time. I want to lead everything I do. Now, I know when I come home at night and I walk into my house, I know I'm not the leader anymore, okay? There's a reason I've been married 34 years and I'm a happily married man. I know where my place in the house is, okay? When I walk out the next morning, I want to be the leader. I want to lead everything. You got to want to lead. But you can definitely, if you're not that natural born leader, and there are those people, then you can develop it if you really want to do that.
Great, that's a great lesson, Oak. So for everyone who has this question on their mind, that I don't seem to be that person who is naturally born or brought up in the way that you have those leadership skills in you, you still can work on it. There are ways that you need to work on it, right? And the most important thing that Oak said is that you got to be open to it first, because if you don't take up the responsibilities that come your way of taking up those leadership positions, taking up those leadership roles, taking up those leadership responsibilities, not necessarily the designation, you will never get to know what it is to be a leader. You will never face those challenges, so you will not know what to work on, what your strengths are, what your weaknesses are.
Absolutely. So I tell people, look, we can sit in a classroom and I can tell you all the theory about leadership that you until you're bored. I can teach you all the things in a classroom about what leaders do and how they do it and why they do it. But guess what? That doesn't make you a leader. I'm sorry, it doesn't. You got to go out and lead. And I get another good example. I was working with one of the universities here that I work with, and they asked me to be a part of the committee to develop a leadership curriculum. They wanted to start a minor so you could get a minor in leadership. And so they had to develop from scratch. So they asked me to come be a part of that, building that curriculum. And I was happy to do that. And we went through all the theory and all the things that we had to do. And then they said, "Well, we're done." And I said, whoa. Nowhere in there have we talked yet about the practical part of that, going out and actually being a leader. I said, "You've just taught them what it takes to be a leader. You have not taught them anything about being a leader." I said, we got to have some practical exercise here where you actually get to go out and practice what we just taught you. Otherwise, we've wasted these people's time.
True, and I see this happening in a lot of places. That there are a lot of theories that are discussed, a lot of conversations that happen around leadership, but there is no practical application. It's important for you to also understand, because in my trainings there are a lot of people who talk to me and tell me that, Prashant, I wish that the training that you're taking us through had a lot of practical elements to it as well, because we have a time limit where we do trainings for a day or two. That
Yeah,
does not give us enough time to actually go back to them on week or month on month basis to actually help them apply what we taught them in a day or two, and actually understand what challenges they're facing, because that is where the real learning happens. So that's a very beautiful point that you brought across, Oak, that only theory, only listening to speeches, only reading books, only attending trainings will not help unless there is a practical element of application to it, because that's where you will know what works and what does not work, and plus how does it work. So that's
right.
that's a great point. So
Yeah,
thank you for bringing that up, Oak. Yeah,
yeah,
sorry, go ahead.
I think that is huge. And when I do a presentation with some organization, I always set up, if they want, that a month from now, here's my email. If you guys got questions, come, when you guys are having meetings or whatever, you got questions, kind of put 2 or 3, 4 questions together, send them to me. I'm happy to answer them, or we can do a Zoom meeting or whatever you want to do. But a month from now, I would like to follow up and see how you're doing, and answer any questions that you have, or address any problems that you're seeing.
Hmm.
And I some take me up on that, some don't, and that's okay. I mean, I know the world's a busy place, and sometimes you don't have time to do all that, or you don't have the money to afford to keep
Hmm.
doing things like that. But you know what? This is what I tell people: you may be busy, you may think you don't have the money, but there is very few things in your organization that is more important than leadership.
True. Well said, Oak. Absolutely. That's very powerful and very true. Now, Oak, we have a comment here that is from Purav Bhatt. He says, "Thanks for the message, Colonel. If a leadership opportunity knocks on your door, say yes to it." So yes, Purav,
Absolutely.
absolutely, absolutely. So we are getting reactions to the strong points that you're making, Oak. So Oak, that brings me to the next question that's running in my mind now. I have made a lot of notes about your book, and on your book, if you can see it, every second page has been highlighted with something, because there is so much that I picked up. First I decided that I'll write down everything that I'm learning from it, then I'm like, oh my god, there is way too much, I'll end up writing the whole book. So let me actually make a mark those things down, and based on that I picked up few things that we can discuss in the hour that we have, and bring that learning to our audience. So one thing that you mentioned in your book, okay, is that there's a statement that you make which says, great leadership handed down from generation to generation is what develops great nations. Now here we are talking about a nation, a country as a whole. So in this book you also say that you have never ever forgotten these lines. So my question to you is, why do you say that you have never forgotten these lines? And second follow-up question with that is, how do you apply this in the context of organizational leadership?
Yeah. So one of the people who worked for me, and probably one of the best leaders I've ever met, and he worked for me. He was an NCO, a non-commissioned officer in my unit. Um, so I outranked him, but I'm here to tell you he was as good a leader as I was, if not better. And he told me one day, we were sitting there talking, and he said, and it was Master Sergeant David Powell. He's retired from the Army now, a good friend of mine. And he said, sir, we were talking about what we were doing in ROTC, developing the future leaders of the United States Army, the future leaders for the country, and for the civilian world as well. Because our officers, a lot of them don't make a career out of the Army like I did. They do their 4 or 5 years, and then they go into the civilian world, and they use that leadership to help civilian companies. And so he said, sir, what we're doing here is so important. He said, it is great leadership that develops, handed down from generation to generation, that develops great nations. And I thought to myself, wow, that is so powerful. And it is so true. If you as a leader are doing the right things, it is so true. And the great thing about that quote, and I don't take credit for that quote, because that was Master Sergeant David Powell who said that. But I will tell you, that quote is hung in my office. Every office I've had since then, that quote is on the wall to remind me what I do and why I do it. And the great thing about that quote is you can take that word nation and you can substitute company, team, hospital, university, whatever you want to substitute it for, and it doesn't change the context of that quote. Because leadership is so important to every organization. I always tell people, if you show me an organization that has good leadership, I will show you an organization that is successful. You show me an organization that has poor leadership, and I will show you an organization that is struggling and that will probably fail. It is that important. It is the most important aspect of an organization. And why it is so important,
Sorry to interrupt you, Oak.
that's
Why
right.
do you say that? When you say that, why do you say that?
Because it sets the stage for everything else. If you have good leaders, the people that work for you and in your organization will want to be there. And if you're a servant leader where you're taking care of them, they will do anything and everything you ask them to do happily, even beyond, above and beyond what they really should be doing. If they believe that you have their best interest at heart, they will do anything you ask of them. And I believe that, and I've seen it work in the Army and in the civilian world. So I think that is the most important aspect. It sets the stage for everything else. And so why I think it's important at the organizational level is that it does set the stage that you as a leader, your responsibility is to create that next generation of leaders, to create those people who are going to take your place. Because none of us are going to live forever. I'm sorry to tell you, it's not going to happen. And we're not all going to work till the day we die. At least I hope I don't. At some point, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to hand it off to the next generation and say, hey, young man, young lady, now I've trained you, I've developed you, I've mentored you. Now it's your turn. I hope you do a better job than I did. And if we do the job right, they will do a better job than we do. And that is our responsibility, is to train that next generation of leaders. And I'll give you one more example of that. When I was the professor of military science running a program, and now I do the recruiting for a program of ROTC, every new person that walks into the program, I bring them into my office. And if they're an officer, I tell them, look, your job here is to create a lieutenant, a young leader that you wanted when you were a company commander. You want to create that platoon leader that you wanted. If you're an NCO and you walk into my office, I say, look, your job here is to create that lieutenant, that boss that you had when you were a platoon sergeant that you wanted. If you don't do that, that is your fault. And I don't ever want to hear you complain about our second lieutenants ever again, because you had the opportunity to influence the future of the Army for the next 20 years, possibly, and you chose not to do it.
So, you bring up a very interesting point. I've heard a lot of people say that you be the leader that you wanted to have. So, I've heard a lot of people say that, that you become that leader that you wish you had at some point of time.
That's
But I've
right.
never heard anyone saying that you create such leaders that you wish you had. That's a very different perspective. Rather than
Well,
just you being that leader, create.
yeah. Well, how can we expect people to be the leader we wanted if we don't create those leaders? It
Absolutely.
really is our responsibility. And I believe in my heart, because I've seen on the scale of leadership, I've seen authoritarian leadership all the way to what I believe servant leadership. And I believe in my heart that servant leadership is the right answer. That is the way to develop leaders. And if we don't get back to developing those leaders, and we're not developing a whole lot of those anymore, that's not the example that people are seeing out there right now. And we got to get back to developing that type of leader, or not only we in this country, we in the world are in trouble, in my opinion.
True. Great. So on the points that you just shared, Oak, there are a few comments that are coming our way. Sujit Pai says it's essential that corporates take a leaf or two from military leadership will go a long way. So that's what he says. Then we have a LinkedIn user who says absolutely practicing is more important. Mosmi Paul says, hello, Prashant and Colonel, great conversation. Thank you, Colonel, for sharing two things. Foundation has to be basic, and second, leadership characteristic is inborn. Practice leads to another level. That's why everyone wants to be a leader, but don't. So she's talking about practice, where you said leaders can be made, and if you're not one naturally, you can still work on it and become one.
I do agree with that. Absolutely.
And Mona Lisa says, till the point you practically implement the lessons in your life, you will not understand the implementation challenges, particularly in your case. Every community or team will react to different challenges differently. Very, very solid point.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, again, just like we said in the beginning here, there is no one formula for being a leader. It'd be nice if it was, if I could just say,
Yes.
okay, here are the things you got to do every day, and you're going to be a great leader. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? But that
Yes.
unfortunately, that's not the real world. Every organization is different. Every person is different, and what works for me may not work for you, and what works for you may not work for me, and what works for one organization may not work for another organization. And we I think we'll talk about that in a little bit when we talk about leadership and how it transcends professions, which I do believe. But we you've got to figure out those things, and the only way you're going to figure out those things, what you're good at and what works for you, is to practice, to be a leader. It- Nobody can teach you what works for you. You got to figure that out yourself.
On your own. And I think that is the beauty of leadership. I can talk for myself. I was someone who was interested in leadership is because I would have to interact with a lot of people, because there will be a challenge every next day of how to handle a certain person, because every person that you lead in your team is very different. One thing does not work for everyone, and that makes it beautiful. I also had leaders that were irritated because of this, saying that, there are 10 people in my team, 10 people think differently, they behave differently, they get motivated differently, they act differently. What kind of a team do I have? But another way of thinking is that is why you are in that position. The reason you're being given a leadership position is not to just sit on a chair and there are people who are doing work. You
That's
have been put into that position is because you got to manage them, you got to lead them, and as you rightly said, you have to create leaders out of them so that tomorrow when they handle teams and they handle people, they know what to do because you have set that example for them.
that's right.
So,
Absolutely. Because leaders create leaders. Leaders don't create followers. There's plenty of followers out there. You don't have to
yeah,
create followers.
yeah,
Leaders, your responsibility is to create leaders. And the way you do that is you have to develop you have to set aside time and effort and resources to make that happen. It doesn't just happen. I'm sorry. It would be nice if it did, but it doesn't. You've got to set up some time to do some mentoring, teaching, training, developing. And I always tell people, look, if you think you're a leader and you're not doing that, if you're not mentoring people, if you're not training the next generation of leaders, I question whether you're really a leader.
yeah.
You're a leader by title, but you're not really a leader.
True, true, and I think it's important for everyone. I do this in my trainings that I try to understand everybody's definition of leadership. That what is leadership according to you, and the beauty of that conversation once we get into that discussion is that the core of everyone is very different in terms of understanding what leadership is. From outside it looks similar, but when you go deeper, everyone has a very different definition of leadership. Everyone has a very different reason of why they want to be a leader or why they are already in a leadership position, and that makes that conversation very interesting. And that's what brings me to the next question that I have in my mind. Now, your experience mostly, Colonel, is around military, right? And you
That's right.
mentioned this in your book as well, that you often hear a comment like you only know leadership in military because that's where your experience has been. You do not know about leadership outside military. This is the comment that I am reading from your book. So the question that I have for you here is, and I'm trying to bring relevance of this in terms of my experience. Now there are a lot of challenges that leaders face in similar way as you did, or the comment that you heard is that there are leaders who are trying to move from domain to domain, or they're trying to move from one industry to another industry. All right, somebody is trying to move from manufacturing to service, or maybe from product to a service division, or within the same function they're trying to move from sales to marketing, or say marketing to HR. Now when such interests are developed, or somebody shares such an interest, there is a setback that comes their way where it's told that you're not from that domain, you will not understand it. So it becomes challenge for people to shift industries or domains. So in your perspective, since you're talking about military leadership and then civilian leadership, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, that's a great question, Prashant. So I always tell people leadership is leadership. I don't care where you learned it, don't care where you practiced it. If you are a good leader, you can lead anything. And it doesn't matter what profession you're in, you can move between professions. Now, that takes a couple things. You can't just wake up and say, okay, now I'm going to go do this. You got to do a little bit of studying. You got to figure out some things before you're going to be successful. But I always, two examples, well, the main example, I was a combat arms officer in the United States Army. So my job was to fight battles, fight wars. When I retired from the Army, I took over the day-to-day operation of a food bank. I was the associate director of a food bank. You don't get any more different than that. Killing people, blowing stuff up, handing out food. That's about as 180-degree difference as you get. Okay? So, and I knew nothing about the day-to-day operation of a food bank. But I knew how to lead. So what I do, and this is the way I do it, and the way I believe that it can be done. I don't care what profession you're moving from to another. Is that the first thing I did was I did a little bit of research of what the organization did and why it did it, and kind of got an idea of what I was getting into. Then when I took over the day-to-day operation, I told my boss, I said, okay, I'll do this, but I got to have two things. You got to let me run the day-to-day operation. Don't worry about it. I will take care of that. And you got to let me build the team that I'm going to use. So I have the right to hire and fire. And he said, absolutely. Got it. So he did. So the first month, I did almost nothing except what I had to keep it going day to day, which it was pretty much doing that on its own, because we're all creatures of habit. They were all doing the same thing they'd always done. But I went around and I asked questions. I said, so why are we doing it that way? Why do we do that? Why don't we do it this way? And I started getting to, first of all, know the people and let them know me, because they saw my face. Now they know the guy who's in charge, and they're starting to hear why I think things are important and what I think is important. And I'm getting their feedback. And so now I'm starting to figure it out. And I'm starting to figure out who the superstars on my team are, the guys and gals that I can go to when I got to get something done. I can walk up to them and say, hey, I need you to do this. And I know it's going to get done. And then I went back and I kind of changed a couple of things that I thought needed to be changed. And then I ran the day-to-day operation. And I can tell you, when I took over, we were, off the top of my head, I could think we were handing out like 1.2 million pounds of food a year. When I left 18 months later, we were handing out 3.8 million pounds. So leadership is leadership. You can lead anything you want. I always tell people, look, I know nothing about hospitals. I try to stay away from hospitals. There's mean people in there trying to do mean things to me, giving me shots and stuff. So I stay as far away from a hospital as I can. But if you put me in charge of a hospital tomorrow, I promise you I can run it, because I know how to lead. I'll find the people who know how to do the day-to-day things that have to be done, and I will encourage them and incentivize them and motivate them to do it as well as they can, and they will take care of the things that I need them to do. Leadership is leadership. I believe that 100%.
A great point, Oak. Leadership is definitely a very powerful statement that you made. Now, one thing that I got interested in, which is staying with me right now in my mind, is that with your definition, with your explanation, what I can see is that leadership is about people. Now, when I say that, this is what I mean. Now, you moved from military to a civilian domain and a very different world altogether. Now, having said that, when you took over operations there as a leader, you did not need to have domain expertise, which means you did not need to understand how that business works, because there are people out there who are working there who know and understand how business works.
That's
So
right.
the first thing that you did is to not showcase yourself as a domain expert, because then you are faking your identity. You actually reached out to the people saying that I know you are experts, you have been working here. I'm just curious to understand what you're doing and why you're doing that, and why are you doing it this way. So your first approach was curiosity, your first approach was inquiry, and that what it did beautifully psychologically that I can understand now is it built a connection with people where people look at you saying that he's a leader, he's the top guy in charge, he's coming to us and he's trying to understand us, he's trying to understand the whole process. So that makes them feel connected to you as a person, so that starts building that connection. and you also get to know people. You need to understand that. And second thing that you said is, while you were getting aware of all these learnings, and through your curiosity you were understanding things, what it was also doing was, it was giving you a third eye view of who the superstars in your team are, who are people who understand business better, who are people who are more action oriented, who are people who are more result oriented, who are people who are very active, who you can reach out to, and you know that they are self driven and they will get things done. Now, this is a very important trait for a leader, that you have curiosity, you connect with your people. While you're doing that, in your mind, you're also observing who is what kind of a person. Who do I go to because he or she is self driven? Who is somebody who I need to drive? Who is somebody who will just do what they've been told to do and will not do more than that? Because you will have a mix of different kind of people. So
Yeah,
that
every
awareness,
organization is going to have those people. But
yes,
the
yes,
other piece of that is you're figuring out who those people are that you're going to develop as the next generation of leaders in that organization, because,
absolutely.
and that's all part of it. Because one of the great things about it is, my dad's best friend when I was growing up, he worked at Chrysler Motor Company, a motor, a plant 12 miles away from our town that we grew up in, where they were putting together the Chrysler car, whatever car that was at the time that they were putting there. And my dad's best friend worked there for 36 years. He worked at Chrysler Motor Company. And all he did for those 36 years, his job was to put the fender on whatever car was being produced in that factory. So if you were running that factory, if you got there that day, you were a brand new person in charge of that factory, and somebody come up to you and said, "Sir, we have a problem with the fenders on our new car," who would you go talk to? I hope you would go talk to the guy who's been doing it for 36 years. He probably knew there was a problem. He probably told somebody there was a problem, and somebody said, "Go away. I don't care what your opinion is. Just go do what I
Yeah.
tell you to do." Again, what kind of leader? You got to figure out what kind of leader you want to be. Do you care about the people and the organization, or do you only care about yourself, your title, your money, your car, all those things? If you really care about the people in the organization, you're going to listen to the experts, because I don't care how long, even if you're not new to an organization, if you're like 23 years in the military like me, you still don't have all the answers. I'm sorry, it
Mhm.
doesn't work that way. You may think you do, but you don't. And if you think you do, then you're only using the experience that you have. You're not using
Mhm.
everybody else's experience as well. So you're cheating that organization out of all that experience. I believe that.
Great point, Oak. That the perspective that you're sharing is so beautiful. And I've heard this a lot, where we talk about that a leader should not be know it all, but a very different perspective to it, saying that if you are somebody who is playing that card of know it all to just satisfy your ego, it's coming from some sort of insecurity, because you want to hold on to that position, that there is nobody better than me, so that you feel that sense of importance in that organization, and you keep going, and people don't ask you to move away, because you are somebody who knows something that every other people do not. What you said, a different perspective, was that that you have to think that you are actually cheating your people. You're not helping your people grow, because you are not growing as a leader. Your people are also not getting the opportunity to grow as people, so you're actually cheating them. And with those people, you're also cheating the organization, because there is so much value these people can bring to the organization, but you, being in a position of authority, are actually putting a lid on that. You're not allowing that potential to come out. You're not allowing that knowledge to be highlighted. You're not allowing those skills, those interests to come out, is why the people and the organization is not benefiting from it. So that's a very powerful perspective, Oak, that a leader needs to think about, that it's not just about you. Your people are losing out, your organization is losing out.
Yeah, I always tell people, look, the way I like to make decisions, and I like to get other people involved is when I had to do something, I would walk in with my junior leaders, and maybe even the entire organization if I had time and and I thought it was appropriate. But certainly my junior leaders, I would walk in and say, "Okay, guys and gals, this is what we got to do. Give me some ideas." I kind of had an idea how I wanted to do it, but I wanted to hear some other people's ideas of how they wanted to do it. One of the great things about that, Prashant, is that you got people who you think are your superstars, and they'll come up with an idea, and you're like, where did that come from? Yeah, that's not a good idea. Or you'll get somebody who you thought, like that young man I thought was never going to make it, and all of a sudden he comes up with a great idea, and you're like, wow, what a great idea. And one of the things I figured out was that over the years, when I do that, is lots of times I will take a little bit from that person's opinion or ideas, and I'll take a little bit of that one, and I'll take some of mine, and we'll put it all together, and then that's what we're going to do. And two things happen when you do that. You use everybody's experience, so it's not just yours, so you're not limiting what can be done to your experience and your knowledge. And number two, everybody buys into what you're going to do now, because now it's not Colonel McCulloch's solution or idea, it's our idea, our solution. Now it's us, not him. And again, if you're a servant leader, if you believe in being a servant leader, then that's the way to do things. Because now they're buying into the organization, not because only because you want them to, but because it's important that they buy into that organization. They feel they're a part of that organization, a valued member of that organization. And if they do that, the sky is the limit. You are going to get much more efficient. You're going to get much more productive if they actually believe that they are a part of that organization.
Absolutely. That's a wonderful way of bringing that element of inclusivity in that whole process, and bringing in an element of self leadership, because they brought that idea forward. So it seems like you are supporting that idea, but they are leading that whole thing. So that brings in that energy of oneness and inclusion where they drive that whole thing forward. That's a great point. Now, one thing that's coming into my mind based on, the same question that I asked you about military and the corporate world. Couple of things that that come on top of your head based on your experience, which you think that these two things are what I would like to bring from the world of military to the corporate world, and it would bring in a great difference. What would those, if you just had that power, saying that God comes to you and say that, Colonel, tell me two things that you want to bring from military into the corporate world. With just one click, it will happen. What would those two things be?
So I think the number one thing that I believe, and I talk about it, not so much in my leadership, a little bit in my leadership presentation and in the book, but mainly in my other presentation, major presentation I give, how to be successful. I talk about self-discipline. Self-discipline is the key to life, in my opinion. Whether you're in the military or civilian world or wherever you are, no matter what profession you're in, if you are self-disciplined, then I think you can be successful. That's the first step in being successful. And my father, who growing up, I used to tell my father was just a mean old man, and he was, and that's okay. I am who I am because of that. There's no doubt about it. But he used to tell me, son, discipline yourself so other people don't have to. And he always said, if I got to stand over you and tell you what to do and when to do it and how to do it and why not to do that, then you're not an asset to my organization. You have to be able to make those decisions yourself. And I always bring it across to young men and young women and to junior leaders and people in my organization. I bring it across this way, that every life is about decisions and consequences. And if every decision has a consequence, some of them are good, some of them are bad. And you got to get to the point in your life where you're self-disciplined enough that you make decisions that are going to give you good consequences. And until you get to that point in your life can be tough. It can be rough on you, but that's okay, because then you're learning and you're going to become more self-disciplined because of the consequences that you got. And I think that's huge. So that's number one, self-discipline. Number two, I think, is that I would love to bring from the military world into the civilian world is the motivation. I think some people are, I'm not saying that nobody in the civilian world is motivated, because they certainly are. And I'm in the civilian world now and I'm motivated about what I do, but a lot of people aren't. They're only there for the paycheck. Whereas in the military, got this grander idea that I'm part of something bigger than myself. I'm there to defend the country and the Constitution in America and all those kinds of things. The way of life of the people in my country, whatever country you're in. So I think that that motivation is there a little bit better than it is in the civilian world for most people. And I think if I could bring two things, I'd bring self-discipline and I'd bring motivation into the civilian world the way it is in the military. Does that make sense?
It does. It definitely does. And there are a lot of conversations that are happening around this, and I'm glad that they are. That the focus is moving away from just an individualistic attitude to the grander vision of the organization. What I mean when I say that is, especially to the second point that you mentioned of motivation, is there are a lot of organizations now that are putting in efforts in giving that entire perspective to every employee of what the great vision of the organization is for next 3 5 10 years. Where do we see this going? And
Right.
they're also talking to individuals one by one to make them understand how do they fit in this entire journey, which means how are they important, what they're doing every day, how is it contributing to that larger vision on day basis. So there are efforts that are happening. So I'm glad you mentioned that, and I'm equally glad that it's happening. And it started, it's at a very early stage, but it's happening. People are realizing its importance, that the grand vision that you spoke about in military, that people are fighting for the country, people are there for the entire nation, is what brings that amount of pride that we are serving that entire nation, and they understand that whole vision. The same thing is being applied to the civilian world as well, in the corporate world, of giving them that vision of what they are a part of. So I'm glad that's happening. First thing that you
I would
mentioned.
agree. I think it is happening, and I see it happening, and I think we got to do that. You've got to say, okay, this is the goal for what we want the company to look like, but then we got to talk to the individuals. Okay, what's your goal in this? What's your
Yeah,
responsibility? And then what's the goal that you want 10 years from now? Where do you want to be? Not
yeah,
only in our organization, but in life. 10 years from now, your goal may not to be in this organization. And that's
organization,
okay
absolutely.
if that's what your goal is. And you got to be willing to support that. But how do we get there for the organization and you and get it so that it's on the same track so that it's going in the
So
right direction? And as long as we do that, it's okay.
absolutely. And first point of self discipline is definitely very important. And I'm glad you brought it up, because it again brings in the element of leading by example, especially in leadership. That if you are somebody who is practicing what you're preaching, then people will follow that. Your people will admire that, and they will inculcate that in their behavior because they see you doing what you're saying. So that congruence is very important, and that's where self discipline comes into picture. Sujit here says that yes, self discipline is the key virtue that we need to adopt. Thanks, Colonel and Prashant. Then he also says that intrinsic motivation, work towards a larger cause, which is much bigger than you. So
Right.
that's also a very powerful point. Mosmi says, great point, Colonel and Prashant, about leadership. Totally agree. Leadership can't be restricted in any particular domain. Thanks, Colonel, for giving such a powerful example for hospital. Some basic core leadership characters actually push us to lead. Thank you very much, both of you, for your thoughts. So there is value, definitely, that people are getting from the conversation that we're having, and it's very powerful, Colonel, what you're saying. And as civilians, we're getting more from you, because what you have been doing for many years, that has become a part of you, is not naturally a part of us. That it's something that we're picking up from you, and it's very important.
Yeah,
And
so let's go back to motivation just for 1 second, Prashant, because I think this is important. I always tell people that as a leader, it is your job. That is one of your responsibilities, is to motivate the people in your organization to do the best they can do, and to be part of the organization. And so motivation is very important. And I always tell people, look, a couple things. You don't train people, you don't motivate people with reward and punishment. That's how we train dogs. Okay. That doesn't mean you don't reward people who deserve it and you don't punish people who deserve to be punished. You have to do that, but that's not how you motivate people. You'll quickly run out of rewards and punishment. And then what do you do? And it isn't sex, money, and fame. That's not what motivates people. What motivates people is a sense of purpose. Everybody wants a sense of purpose in everything that we do, whether it's our job, our life, our relationship, our hobby, whatever it is we do it and we enjoy it because it gives us a sense of purpose. So you got to figure out what that sense of purpose is. And I always tell people the way to do that, the easy way, or not easy, there is no easy way, but the way to get there is to try to figure out what makes your organization unique. because that's probably for a lot of people, that is what drew them to your organization. It wasn't
Hmm.
the paycheck, it wasn't this or that, it was that they believe in the concept, the big picture of what your organization does. So what makes your organization unique is what gives them that sense of purpose. And
Hmm.
it's different for every organization. In the Army, motivating people was easy. I walked into the room with my soldiers and I said, hey, look, this is what we got to do. We we defend the American Constitution, we defend the American way of life. Let's go. Motivated, not an issue. Every time worked. That didn't work at the food bank. Go figure, you know? So you got to figure it out. And I use this example, and this is a true example. We were getting ready to hand out food at the largest handout that we did every year. And it was about 3 or 4 weeks away. And so we're in a meeting talking about how we're going to do it. And at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I saw people looking at their watch and closing their notebooks and shuffling around, putting things away like they were going to leave. And we weren't anywhere near done. And I said, what are you guys doing? And they said, well, boss, it's 4 o'clock. It's time to go home. I said, but we're not done. But it's 4 o'clock. It's time to go home. And I said, okay, fine. If you want to leave, go ahead and leave. I said, we still got a lot of things to talk about here. I said, but if you want to leave, go ahead and leave. But before you leave, let me make one thing very clear to you. 3 weeks from now, when we're handing out food and some 19-year-old young lady has to go home and she can't feed her 2-year-old daughter because we didn't do this right, it is your fault. How many people you think left that meeting? 0. I got it. I figured it out. I figured out what motivated them, what the unique thing was that motivated them, and it was helping other people. That's the only reason they were there. Didn't care about the paycheck, didn't care about anything else. They wanted to help other people. My job got 100% easier. I figured it out. So find out what makes your organization unique, and that is what motivates your people.
Wow, that's a very powerful point. Oak, finding that individual motivations, one an organizational level motivation, and one an individual motivation, because what works for person A may not work for person B. So as a leader, I think that's a point that you're trying to make, that it's your responsibility to find out an organizational level motivation. It's also your responsibility to find out what motivates that individual person,
Yeah,
so that in
absolutely.
those one-on-one conversations you can actually bring that up, and that will keep that person going and giving his best.
Absolutely. And I'm here to tell you, you're going to have those individuals who the only reason they are there is to draw a paycheck.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's okay.
And that's all right. Yeah,
As long
yeah.
as they do their job and they're doing what you ask them to do, if that's the only reason they're there and they're happy with the paycheck, then that's fine. They're motivated. Keep them motivated. Keep paying them and they'll be fine. But those ones that are there for things other than that paycheck, you got to figure out what it is, why they're there, so that you keep them motivated, so they're doing the job that you want them to do. And the only way you get there, like you said, Prashant, is to talk to people. There's an amazing concept, isn't it? That you actually talk to the people who work for you.
Yeah, that's something new that a lot of leaders are not doing, and it seemed it was not required. But it's a realization now that it's not just about telling them what to do. There needs to be more conversations about who they are and what they want from life and why are they there.
Yeah,
So I think
absolutely.
I'm glad that shift is happening and that change is happening. Now, Oak, next question that I have on my mind is, again, as I said, I've been reading things in your book, and that's what I'll bring up. In your book, the title of your second chapter is "It's Not About You," and then it's followed by saying "It's All About You." Can you tell us a little about that? What does that mean? Is there an error in printing, or is that the right thing?
That is absolutely the right thing. And I always tell people, it's a dichotomy, obviously, because it's not about you, but it's all about you. And it's very simple. It's not about you, and it's that it's about selfless service. It is not about the title you're going to get. Who cares? It's not about you making the privileges you're going to get. Now, if you're the leader, generally leaders have a few more privileges, and that's okay. That's okay. But that's not why we made you the leader. And it's not about the more money you make living in a nicer house, driving a nicer car. All those things are nice. And if it happens as a leader, good for you. But that is not why we made you the leader. We made you the leader so that you could better serve the organization that we made you the leader in. The people under you, the people above you, and the organization. Help the people below you accomplish what the people above you need to get accomplished, and make the organization a more efficient and better organization. That is why we made you the leader. So it's not about all those things you're going to get. It's all about those things that you are going to do to
Nice.
accomplish that mission. So that's why it's not about you, and it's all about you. It's all about selfless service. And if you don't understand that, I will argue that you will never be a good leader. You got to understand that it's about the people, it's about the organization, and it's not about you. And I'll give you an example of how I bring this across to my lieutenants that we commission every year. The day they get commissioned, and it's a big deal. I mean, to go through 4 years of ROTC, now you're going to be an officer in the United States Army. That is a huge deal. I remember the day I got commissioned like it was yesterday, and that was 40 something years ago. And I remember it like it was yesterday. It's that big a deal. And I always tell them the day they get commissioned, I say, look, congratulations. Today is a great day for you. Enjoy it. It's all about you. But once we pin those bars on your shoulder and you become an officer in the United States Army, you become a leader, it is never about you ever again. Tomorrow, when you wake up, it will never be about you again. It's about the people that work for you. It's about the people that you work for. It's about the mission. It's about the organization. It's about the country. Then if we have time, we might talk about you. But it's about all those things first. And unless you understand that, you're never going to be a good leader.
Very true. That's a great point. I think everyone who's listening to us, who's aspiring to be a leader or who's already a leader, I think this is something that you need to reflect on deeply. That a very powerful statement. As he said, there's a dichotomy in that it's all about you, but it's not about you. That's a very powerful statement to reflect on. If you're honest about being a leader, then you should definitely think about this. That it's what you are in for is much bigger than you. You are important, but what you're doing and what you're in for
Absolutely,
is
you're
much
important.
bigger than you.
Absolutely. As a leader, you are important, and you do have to take some time to take care of yourself to make sure you're healthy and you're making good decisions and all those kinds of things. But in the end, if there's a decision between you and your organization, the organization has to win. And if it
Right.
doesn't, then I'm arguing that you're probably not a very good leader. And your
And
organization's going to be in trouble because you're going to make bad decisions. You're going to make decisions based on your benefit and your personal gain, and
agenda.
not
Yeah.
for those other people in the organization and the organization. So it has to be about those other things, not you.
True, and that brings me to the another thing that I read in your book where you speak about standards. You say that when you set standards and stick to them, there will be people who will fall away, and let them. This is a line by Ralph Waldo Emerson that you mentioned in your book, and right next to this, there's an anecdote, which I would want you to share with people. Where something happened when you took over as a professor of military science. There's an incident that happened, and that's a great learning of leadership, I believe. If you could please share that with us.
Yeah, absolutely. So when great thing about the American Army, when they move you into a new position, they send you to a school so you can learn how to do that job. And it may only be a 2 or 3 week school, and this one was a 3-week school. So I'm sitting there with all these other lieutenant colonels who are getting ready to take over ROTC programs, and there were probably about 30, 35 of us in the room, is my guess. And they're teaching us all the things we needed to know. But the thing, and I remember some of that, I don't remember all of it, not important. The thing I do remember like it was yesterday was the 2-star general, the guy in charge of Cadet Command, the organization that we were going to work for. He walks into the room and he starts telling us his philosophy and what's important to him. And he says to us, if you are taking over an organization that is not making its mission, not commissioning the right number of lieutenants every year, then you ought to lay awake at night thinking about ways to fix that problem in that organization. And I was taking over an organization that had not made its mission in 7 years. So I took that to heart, and I went back to my room that night and I took out a 3x5 card, which still sits on my desk. And I wrote down some things about how I was going to fix that organization. The first thing I wrote was my goal, what I wanted. So I was taking over an organization that had 53 cadets in it. So I wrote down the first goal was I'm going to grow the organization from 53 to 150 cadets in 3 years. Because that was how long I was going to be at that job, 3 years. Next, I started writing down some things, how to get there. And the first thing I wrote down was take care of the cadets in the program. That's number one thing. That's why I'm there. Number two, I wrote down make every cadet want to be like me every single day. So set the example for those cadets. Show them what an officer looks like, how they walk, how they talk, how they behave, the decisions they make, those kinds of things. And I wrote some other things. Those were the two big things. So then I went back to my organization and I had a meeting with everybody who worked for me. And I said, told them all, everything that went on. And I said, this is my vision for the organization. We're going to get to 150 cadets, and this is how we're going to do it. And I said, the number one thing that you need to understand, told all of them sitting in that office, the number one thing you need to understand is the only reason you are here and the only reason I am paying you is to take care of my cadets. And if I ever catch you not taking care of my cadets, you will not work here anymore. And I made them all do the north-south. Yep, I understand. Okay. So I wanted all of them to understand what it was that I was paying them for. So about 3 weeks later, I'm walking down the hall and I'm walking by one of my employees' office. And as I walk by, I see a cadet knock on the door. And as I walk by, I look in and my employee's got his feet up on his desk. He's drinking a Coke and he's talking on his cell phone. And he tells my cadet, go away. I'm busy. Come back tomorrow. And I thought, he's not taking care of my cadet. So I told that young man, I said, go sit outside my office and I'll take care of you in a few minutes. And I went back to my office and I wrote down some things on a piece of paper. And I walked back into that gentleman's office and I put the piece of paper on his desk. And I said, pack your stuff, get out. You don't work here anymore. And he said, well, you can't fire me. I said, I think I just did. In fact, I know I just did. That's what that piece of paper says. Pack your stuff and get out. You didn't take care of my cadet, and that's the only reason I have you working here. And he did. He left. He didn't have a choice. I fired him, and I called up my higher headquarters, and I said, he doesn't work here anymore. Find somewhere else for him to work. And how many other people did you think I had to do that to in my organization? None. Zero. They understood now how serious I was about what their only task was. And I told them, I said, I don't care. Look, I don't care about rules. I don't care about regulations. If you have to break a rule to take care of one of my cadets, you tell me. And if I think it's the right thing to do, then we'll break a rule. We'll break a regulation. Because this is all about taking care of people. Organizations are about people. They're not about rules. They're not about regulations. They're not about that kind of stuff. They're about people. And if we don't understand that as leaders, then you're never going to get everything you can out of that organization, because organizations are about people and people want standards. Most people who work for you want to have a standard. They want to know what that standard is so they can meet it. The thing I tell leaders are, and I'm dead serious about this. If you're a leader and somebody in your organization is not meeting a standard that you have set up for them, and you don't go tell them about it, then you are at fault, not that person. They may think they're doing exactly what you're asking them to do. If you don't tell them that they're not, then they don't. Now, most of the time, when I have somebody who's not meeting a standard, I'm not that blunt about it. Most of the time I say, okay, we're not getting where we need to be here. Here's the problem. Here's the things you're doing wrong. And oh, by the way, here's how to fix it. Because that's just as important as telling somebody what they're doing wrong, that they're not meeting the standard. Okay, how do we fix it? How do we go forward from here? Then it's up to them to either fix it and we go forward, or if they don't fix it, then it's time for them to go find something else to do.
True. And that's a very powerful statement to make, that as a leader, it comes back to setting an example, that you have to lead by example. And second, if you have set certain boundaries, if there are certain rules, if there are certain regulations, if there are certain ways of working in an organization or with your team, everybody has to abide with them, and there have to be consequences for not abiding. Now, having said that, you also mentioned a very interesting point and a very powerful one, that rules and regulations have been created to maintain a certain level of balance and a certain level of discipline, a certain level of structure in functioning. That does not mean they should not be broken or they cannot be broken. If there are rules that need to be broken, have a conversation with your leader, check on it, see what can be done in a way around it. Maybe there is something that needs to change. Maybe there is a rule that's actually not serving the people or the organization, but it's been there for a very long time and it needs to be removed or edited, or something needs to be done with it.
Yeah, because
So
that may be that rule or regulation might be the problem that's causing
yeah,
issues in that organization now because situations change, the world changes, organizations change.
true.
So absolutely.
True, and there are a lot of organizations and a lot of leaders who give this excuse saying that this can't happen, there is a policy against it, or this cannot be done because there is a
Horrible.
policy. Now, understood, yes, there is a policy, and what you're saying is not wrong, but that is not a dead end. If your employees are coming up with something, and if there is a policy stopping you from doing something that you know is right, then you need to have a conversation with people who are building those policies, who are the power to edit those policies, and at least put it on the table for a discussion, saying that there is a policy that's actually going against our people, that's not serving our people well. It's not serving this business well. If it's not serving our people well, let's at least talk about it to see
That's
what
right.
we can do about it, right?
Because again, in the end, it's all about doing the right thing, and
Yeah.
because leaders do the right thing, because it's the right thing to do, not because you're getting benefit from it, not because somebody's going to recognize you for it,
Hmm.
not because anybody's even going to notice. Leaders do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. And if it's the right thing to do to not follow a regulation to take care of a person or the organization in the right way, then we got to have that conversation. And somebody, if you can't make that decision, and sometimes you can because it's your organization, but if it's a bigger part, if it's a part of the bigger organization, then you have to have the guts, the responsibility to walk up to your boss and say, "Hey, boss, we gotta talk about this because
Hmm.
this is hurting the organization and it's hurting people in the organization."
Hmm. A very vital point, Oak. And this brings me, and it beautifully flows down to the next question that I have in my mind, where in the book you speak about change. You talk about implementing change in an organization is never easy. And you say that most organizations have a collective memory of how things have always been done,
Yes.
right? So, what do you mean here when you're talking about this? And, as a leader, how do you deal with it?
Yeah. So we are all creatures of habit, and if you don't believe that, tomorrow morning when you get up and shave, for you guys, remember how you shaved. I promise you, the next day when you remember it, you will shave exactly the same way. When you put on your shoes in the morning, put on your socks and shoes. I promise you, 90% of you put on your socks and shoes the exact same way every single day. We are creatures of habit, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's a good thing in most cases because we do things without having to think about them, and that's good as long as the habits are good habits. You know, so there's nothing wrong with that. We just have to realize and acknowledge that we are creatures of habit, and we do things because of that a certain way. And organizations are no different. Once an organization starts doing something a certain way, they're always going to do that way unless we change it. And again, like when I took over the food bank, I walked around and I talked to people and I said, "So why did we do it that way? Why did we do that?" And the answer that I would get sometimes, and as a leader, you can never ever accept this answer. You get this answer, "Well, that's the way we've always done it."
Hmm.
Okay, that doesn't answer my question. Why are we doing it that way?
Hmm.
Because if just because we've always done it that way doesn't mean that it's the right way to do it or it's the best way to do it. We have to ask that question. Why are we still doing it that way? So never accept that answer that it's why we've always done it. It's because we've always done it that way, because that's not the right answer. The way to solve that is, again, to get everybody involved in the decision making. If you want to change something, you got to change, you got to get everybody to agree that the change is a good thing. And
Hmm.
generally, if you're the one dictating what the change is, then it's the colonel is making us do this. It's the
Hmm.
director who is making us do this. It's the boss who is making us do this. And that sometimes people are going to be reluctant to make the changes that need to be done. If you involve people in the decision, go to those experts, the ones who have been putting the fender on the car for 36 years, or the person who's been doing that job for 15 years, and ask them their opinions. Then it's our decision, it's our change, and it's a lot easier to get people to implement that change. The last piece of that is you have to check up on it. You got to
Hmm.
go around and make sure that the change that you have decided is being implemented. Because if you don't, again, we are creatures of habit and we will go right back to doing things the same
The
way
way
we've
they
always done them because that's the way we have always done them. So
right.
you got to go around and check at least for a little while to make sure that it's being done. And then once it's being have been done for a little bit, now it becomes the muscle memory. It becomes the organizational memory of how we're doing things. And now it becomes the habit that we're doing.
Nice. So bringing in that new habit, pushing it every time, questioning things or why things are happening the way they are happening, including everyone in that conversation or making that decision, is the way of building that new habit. It might be difficult in the beginning because it's a change, it's something new, but slowly and steadily you won't realize that will become your part of your DNA. That will become the new way of functioning. And then when someone after a few years comes and asks you, why are you doing it this way? Your answer would be, this is how we do things here, because that's your new way of doing things, right?
Yeah, well, then you can answer, we used to do it this way, but
This
we all
way.
sat down together and figured out the best way to do it. And now this is the way we do it.
This is the way
There's
we
a
do it.
reason why we're doing it. Now you got a reason why we do it this way, not that it's the way we always did it.
True.
But again, that goes back to a culture thing. And then, you got to keep developing that culture and keep emphasizing what your culture is because culture does just happen, but it's not the culture you want generally. If you want a specific culture, you have to cultivate that culture. You have to
Mhm.
develop it. You have to train it. You have to teach it. And it's a continuous thing. Just because you just taught everybody in your organization today that culture, 5 years from now, there may not be anybody who's in that organization 5 years from now that
Mhm.
was there that day. So you
True.
got to continuously teach it and groom it so that everybody new who comes into that organization learns what that culture is.
True, and a lot of times I've observed that it's a very easy path to take when you choose not to do these things. What I mean when I say that is, like the earlier question about the policies and procedures and the rules and regulations, or the statement saying this is how things work here or this is not how things work here, becomes a very easy way to just shut somebody down, saying that this is the dead end, there is nothing beyond it. And
Yeah.
you as a leader also sometimes feel that yeah, this is an answer that probably I was given by my leaders when I questioned something, and this seems to be a dead end, which means if there is something on paper and it's a policy, the answer is simple, that it's policy, and there is nothing, the conversation ends there. Or if something is something, we're trying to do something new and that's not the way we do things here, the answer is simple, that this is not how things function here, and the person will just go and shut down. So it's important for leaders to realize also, it brings back what we learned earlier or what we spoke earlier, that you are building leaders and you are leading by example. It's important that to understand that sometimes you might be the first one who is breaking these stereotypes. You might be the first one who is doing something that has not been done before, and you have to be ready for that as a leader.
Yeah.
You as a leader can't just do what you have seen leaders doing. There are times you might end up doing something which you have not seen any of your leaders doing, but you feel it's the right thing to do because your approach or your intention to leadership is that, is it serving my organization, is it serving my people? If the answer to any or both of this is no, then obviously you need to think differently, that something needs to be changed. This is not how things should continue to work.
Yeah.
Now this brings in that element of courage, that what you mentioned earlier, that you bring from military to corporate world. I think courage is also a very important aspect that people need to develop as leaders in the civilian world, where they're going and questioning things, putting things on the line and taking that chance. Would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. I agree. I mean, that is part of a leader is to take care of people and to take care of people, you're going to have to sometimes butt heads with your boss. I mean, that's just the way it is. And if you can't do that, then again, it goes back to that trust. If the people who work for you believe that you have their best interest at heart, that you are taking care of them and you're looking out for them, then they are going to do great things for you. If
Hmm.
they ever at any time don't believe that that is what you have, that you have their interest at heart, that it's all about you, you have lost that trust and it will never come back. I don't care what you do. So you got to be able to walk into your boss's office, and I talk about it in problem solving, but it's in lots of things. You got to be able to walk into your boss and say, "Hey, boss, we got a problem, and this is it, and we got to fix it." And you know, again, if it's your boss, the boss could say, "Sorry, Oak, I don't want to fix it. Go away." And then you got some choices you got to make. But at least you had the courage to go in, and the people who work for you know that you went in and brought it up and tried to fix the problem. But there are some things, let's face it, everybody has a boss. Um, and sometimes the boss above you is not going to be receptive to what you want to do. And then you got some choices you got to make. You either got to go, you got to take it back to the people and explain why. And then at some point, sometimes you got to say, okay, then I'm done here. I got to go do something else. And you got to have the courage to do that, to say, yeah, okay, I've done everything I can in this organization. If they're not going to listen to me and they're not going to help me develop it further, I need to go find somewhere else to work.
Absolutely. And one thread that is connecting everything that we are discussing today is communication. Everything is about talking to your people coming and talking to you
And your
understanding
boss.
them. Yes, and your boss across, right? You need.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
And communication is a two-way street. And I tell people, look, if you don't believe that communication is a two-way street, you're not a leader, you're a dictator. If communication to you means I tell you what to do and that's all that communication is, that's not communicating. That's me telling you something. Communication is a two-way street. It has to be.
It has
Otherwise,
to.
you're wasting people's time.
Absolutely. And that brings me to what I read in your book, and that's also very interesting around communication, where you say that what I found is that communication in many organizations is not as good as its leaders and workers think it is. What do you mean by this, Oak?
Yeah, so I get asked lots of times to come to an organization for a day or two because they're having some issues and they want me to come take a look. And one of the first questions I always ask is, how's the communication in your organization? And I always get the answer, well, it's great. And I said, well, I doubt it, or I wouldn't be here. Because right below leadership, I said leadership is the most important thing in an organization. Right below that is communication. If you don't have an organization that is communicating well, it will not run efficiently or effectively. And two parts of that. Number one is people think they are communicating, but they're really not. Just sending an email out to 10 people is not communication. How do you know they even answered that email, or they opened that email, or they understood what that email said? So it's okay to send an email, but you got to follow up to make sure that everybody understands what's required of them and what's being asked of them and what's being put out. So they think, but just because they send out an email, that they have communicated, and we all know that isn't true. So lots of times that's the case, or they're just not taking the time to do that face-to-face communication verification. I always prefer face-to-face when I'm asking somebody to do something, because then I can get that look in their eye of whether or not they understand it or not. If you ask somebody to do something they don't understand, you can generally pretty quickly figure that out if you're standing face-to-face with them. But the second part of that is that you have to train yourself and everybody in your organization to ask this simple question. Every time you get a piece of information, you got to ask yourself, who else needs to know this information in this organization? And that is so important. And the reason it's important is for this reason. I may walk up to you and assign you a task and say, Prashant, I want you to do this. And these are the resources you can use. This is the time, the money, whatever. And then I'm going to check up on you every week to see where you're going and if you're having any problems. And every week you may come up to me and say, I'm doing this and I'm getting this far along, but I can't figure this piece out. I don't have this piece of information. And guess what? The guy in the office right next to you had that piece of information the entire time. He just didn't know you needed it. If he had asked the question, who else needs to know this piece of information, you would have had it and you would have completed that task 3 weeks ago. That happens all the time, because we don't communicate well in organizations.
True. Again, a very interesting point, and a very powerful one, because as I said earlier, it is communication that's the thread that's connecting everything. Because if this piece is not in place, everything else just falls apart. It does not work. You might think you're trying to do everything, but if this is not in place, everything else does not work at all. And even if it does work, it does not work as effectively as
That's
it
right.
should be working.
That's right. And communication is more than just talking. I mean, it is all those things. It's verbal, nonverbal, it's written, it's text. Although I hate text, I got it. It's text and email and all those things. And you got to get good at all of it. And your organization has to get good at all of it. And one of the things I always talk about, it's meetings, and meetings are huge, and we got to have meetings. As much as sometimes they're a pain, I got it. We got to have meetings and we got to run them efficiently and effectively. And if we do that, then we can tie all those things together: the written, the communicate, the verbal, the nonverbal, the text, the email. We can bring all that stuff together to make sure that we are really communicating and people understand what it is that's being asked of them to do.
Absolutely. And I love the point where you said that if there is an email that goes across the organization to your 1,000, 10,000, or a million employees, does not mean they have understood it. It
Yeah.
does not mean they have opened and read it. It does not mean that they understood what you wanted them to understand, because there is so much ambiguity. You might have all million opening them. That does not mean all million read it. Even if all million read it, does not mean all million understood it.
Or
Even if all
or
million
or
understood it,
understood or
they
understood
might
it
not
as
have
the
understood
same
what you
thing.
wanted them to understand.
Exactly. Exactly. And it goes back to that old saying that if it can be misunderstood, it will be. And
It will
it
be.
will be.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So again,
Yes.
that's why you have to have that face to face eventually, or a Zoom meeting where I can see you, or
Yeah.
a meeting where we say, okay, this is what we asked for. Do you really understand what I'm asking you to do? Now,
Yeah.
can you do that to a million people in an organization, or 100,000? Probably not. But again, a good leader isn't taught. It doesn't have to talk to every single one of them. You got to talk to the leaders of those people. And in the
Absolutely.
Army, we use this concept of 3 to 5 people. So every leader should have 3 to 5 people that they're working from it for through. So I don't care if you're running a platoon of 30 people, or if you're running the Department of the Army with 2 million people. Each leader at each level is controlling 3 to 5 leaders. And if you do that, that's manageable. And then they do their 3 to 5 leaders, and then they do their 3 to 5 leaders. And it goes on down the line to where everybody now understands what's being asked.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, and that's a very important point to understand, Oak, because there are a lot of leaders who also say this, that the organization is too big, that change is very difficult to happen, the communication is very difficult to happen. But it's very important for everyone to understand that the CEO doesn't have to communicate with all 1 million people one to one. The
Yeah.
CXOs don't have to communicate with all million people one to one. The executive director team does not have to talk to all people one to one. There are layers and level to it, and there is no one person who has more than 8 to 12 people reporting, which means
Absolutely.
you focus on your 8 to 12. That's all. You just have to focus. You don't care about anything else. Just focus on your 8 to 12, and that's manageable. And
Yes,
that's what you can
absolutely.
actually, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah,
That's a piece of the pie you can bite off and chew. Whereas, you
exactly.
know, you can't talk to a million people. You can't talk to 1,000 people and make them
True,
understand on a daily
true.
basis. It's too hard to do. So you got to develop those organizations that have those layers. And and would depend on what type of organization. Like I said, the Army likes to have 3 to 5. We go up to 10 to 12 at times, like you said, 8 to 12, 8 to 10. But you got to figure out as the leader what makes sense in your organization for that level. What level of that happens. But that's the only way you're going to communicate with everybody, is through subordinate leaders at every level.
True, true. Great. Oak, this has been a wonderful conversation. There is so much that we've spoken about. There's so much value, I'm sure, that our audience has gotten from this. And there are a lot of people who will watch the recording as well, and there is a lot that they will gain from it. One request that I have for you, Oak, before I end this conversation, because I definitely loved your book, and there is a lot that I learned from it. But one thing that just hits the nail in the head, which is something that it's powerful, that made me think, that made me reflect, and that is something that will stay with me. Is definitely the one final thought that you mentioned on page 153 of your book. So if you could please read that out for us, it would be great.
Yeah, I would love to, Prashant.
Thank
Because
you.
because in the presentations that I give, this is the last thing I leave people with, because it's
Wow.
that important. It really is.
It is. It sure is.
So I say one final thought. What kind of leader do you want to be? Do you want to be the leader who always does the right thing, even when the right thing may not be in your personal best interest? Do you want to be the leader that sets the good example in everything you do every day? Do you want to be the leader who holds the people in your organization to high standards? What kind of leader do you want to be? The answer is up to you. You are the one who must decide what type of leader you want to be. You can be the leader who is just there for a paycheck. or for the extra privileges, or you can be the leader who is there for a higher purpose, the leader who honestly cares about right and wrong, the leader who actually cares about the welfare of the organization and its people, the leader who truly wants to make a difference in the lives of others, the leader who takes responsibility for teaching and training the next generation of leaders. To that end, the decision is yours. It's my sincere hope that you choose to lead. It's my sincere hope that you become the leader you were meant to be for the sake of the organization and the people you lead, and for the sake of the next generations of leaders who will follow in your footsteps. The future of our country depends on it.
Wow. Thank you so much, Oak. On that note, I would like to thank you for being here. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for sharing your experience, knowledge, and wisdom with us. There is a lot that we got from us. And as I said in yesterday's video as well, everything that you have said, everything that is in your book aligns beautifully with what this show is trying to drive, those small little things about leadership that matter the most. So thank you once again. You have a wonderful day ahead, and I'll see you some other time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you having me on the show, and I would love to come back and talk more if you want at some point.
Absolutely. I definitely want that, and we shall plan that soon. And everyone in the audience, thank you so much for your time. And always, as I say, thank you so much for your support that you're giving me and this show. And as promised, we had an amazing guest with us today who shared some beautiful, deep insights with us about leadership. Next week, next Saturday, we will again get another guest and understand more perspectives about leadership because that is the mission that we're on. So thank you so much for your time. You have a wonderful weekend. I'll see you next Saturday. Goodbye. Thank you, Oak. Goodbye.
Thank you.